I was kneeling beside my grandmother's hospice bed, holding her cold and trembling hand as the machines beside her slowed to a whisper, and at that exact moment, through the open door, I could hear my younger sister Brooke laughing in the hallway while she forged my name onto the documents that would erase 6 years of my life. I did not know it yet. I only knew that the woman who raised me was slipping away, and that for some reason my own family had gathered outside that room, not to grieve, but to wait. They were not waiting for her last breath out of love. They were waiting because the moment she was gone, a fortune would change hands, and they had already decided that I would receive nothing at all. Sharing a story. This painful is not easy for me, so before I go any further, I want to ask you a small favor. If you have ever been the one who gave everything to a family that gave nothing back, let me know in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is for you right now. Knowing that there are people out there who understand reminds me that the silence I lived in for so many years is finally over. Your words tell me I am no longer carrying this alone. My name is Margaret. I am 38 years old, and I live in Savannah, Georgia, a city of old oak trees, iron gates, and families who care more about appearances than they will ever admit. If you had asked me 2 years ago who I was, I would not have told you my profession or my dreams. I would have told you that I was a granddaughter, a daughter, and a sister, in that order, and that being those things was the entire purpose of my existence. I believed, deep in my bones, that the measure of a good woman was how much of herself she was willing to give away. I gave and gave until there was almost nothing of me left, and I called that love. I know now that it was something closer to slow disappearance. For most of my adult life, I worked as a registered nurse. I was good at it. I spent 11 years in the cardiac unit of a large hospital, working long overnight shifts, learning how to stay calm when everything around me was falling apart, learning how to hold a stranger's hand while they faced the worst moment of their life. I loved that work because it let me be useful, and being useful was the only kind of worth I understood. My grandmother, whose name was Genevieve, was the one person in my family who ever told me she was proud of me. She would call me her steady girl. She would say that I had the heart of a healer and the spine of a soldier. When I was small and the house was loud and unkind, she was the warm room I could escape to. She was, in every way that counted, my real mother. So when Genevieve was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, there was never a question in my mind about what I would do. The diagnosis came on a gray morning in early autumn, and within a month it was clear that she could no longer live alone in the big house on the edge of the historic district, the house she had lived in for more than 50 years. The family held a meeting in my parents' living room. My father cleared his throat and said that nursing homes were expensive and impersonal, and that it would break Genevieve's heart to be placed among strangers. My mother nodded along and then turned to me with a soft and practiced smile. "Margaret," she said, "you are a nurse, and you do not have a husband or children pulling at you. You have always been the strong one. We need you to do this. It only makes sense." It only makes sense. I would hear that phrase 1,000 times over the next 6 years, every single time they wanted to take something from me. It only makes sense that you pay for this. It only makes sense that you give up that. I was the one without a family of my own, and so in their eyes, my time, my money, and my future were communal property, free for the taking. My sister Brooke had a husband and 2 children and a house in a gated community an hour away, and that was treated as a sacred boundary no one could cross. My life, by contrast, was treated as an empty room they could store their burdens in. I quit my job. I want you to understand what that meant. I walked away from 11 years of seniority, from a pension that was finally maturing, from health insurance, from the only career I had ever wanted, and I did it in a single afternoon. I moved into Genevieve's old house to care for her around the clock, and from that day forward, my entire world shrank to the size of those rooms. I learned the rhythm of her good days and her terrible days. I learned how to coax her to eat when she had forgotten what a spoon was for. I learned how to gently redirect her when she stood at the front door at 3 in the morning, convinced she had to catch a train that had stopped running 40 years ago. I learned how to keep my voice soft and bright when she looked at me with frightened eyes and asked who I was. The money drained away faster than I ever imagined. Caring for someone with advancing dementia is brutally expensive, and almost none of it is covered. There were medications that cost hundreds of dollars a month. There was a hospital bed and a wheelchair and a special mattress to prevent sores. There were the home modifications, the grab bars and the ramp, and the locks placed high on the doors. There were the 2 days a week I had to hire a relief aide just so I could sleep for a few uninterrupted hours without my grandmother wandering into the street. Over the course of those 6 years, I spent more than $120,000 of my own savings on her care. I emptied my retirement account. I sold my small condominium. I cashed in the modest inheritance my late father's mother had once left me, a different grandmother, a quieter line of the family, and I poured all of it into keeping Genevieve safe and comfortable and at home. And where was my family during those 6 years? My parents visited perhaps 4 times a year, always around the holidays, always for an hour or two, always with a camera. My mother would arrive with a single bouquet of grocery store flowers, arrange Genevieve's blanket just so, take a photograph of the two of them smiling, and post it online with long captions about the sacredness of family and the duty of caring for our elders. The comments would pour in, praising her devotion. Strangers called her a saint. Meanwhile, I was the one changing the sheets at 4 in the morning, the one cleaning the wounds, the one who had not slept a full night in years, the one whose hands had grown rough and whose own health was beginning to fail. I was invisible in those photographs. I was the hands at the edge of the frame, the blur in the background. My sister Brooke was worse, because Brooke was clever. Brooke understood the value of a performance. She almost never came in person, but she was relentless online. She would call Genevieve on video for 3 minutes on her birthday and record it. She would send a card and photograph the card. She built an entire reputation as the loving granddaughter without ever once spending a night under that roof or wiping a single tear from our grandmother's face, and the family adored her for it. Brooke is so thoughtful, my mother would sigh. She has so much on her plate with the children, and she still finds time. The bar for Brooke was on the floor, and the bar for me was somewhere in the clouds, and I never once stopped to ask why. There were moments of grace, and I want to be honest about those too, because they are what kept me alive. There was a hospice nurse named Teresa who came in the final year, and Teresa saw me. On her second visit, she sat me down at the kitchen table, looked at the dark circles under my eyes and the way my hands shook, and she said something no one in my family had ever said. She said, "Margaret, who is taking care of you." I did not have an answer. I started to cry, and I could not stop, and Teresa just sat with me and let me. She became my friend. She was the one who told me, gently, that I needed to protect myself. She was the one who first said the words that would later save everything. She said, "Honey, you need to document all of this. Every receipt, every appointment, everything she says to you on her clear days. You think your family will remember the truth. They will only remember what is convenient." I did not fully understand why Teresa was warning me, but I trusted her, and so I started keeping records. I kept every receipt in a labeled folder. I kept a journal of Genevieve's medical care, dated and detailed, because I was a nurse, and that was second nature to me. I kept the bank statements showing the transfers, and because I held the medical power of attorney, the legal document Genevieve had signed years earlier naming me as the person who would make her health decisions, I had access to everything. I was the one the doctors called. I was the one who signed for her treatments. In the eyes of the law, I was already her protector. I just did not yet know how much that would come to matter. There was one afternoon I will never forget, a rare and beautiful clear day near the end. Genevieve woke up and she was herself again, fully, the way the fog sometimes lifts entirely in the last stretch of that disease. She knew my name, she knew the year, she held my hand, and she told me she remembered everything I had done. She said, "Margaret, you gave up your whole life for me, and I will not let them pretend you did not. Bring me the camera." And so I propped up my phone and my grandmother, lucid and calm and absolutely certain, recorded a message. She stated her name and the date. She said that I, Margaret, had been her sole caregiver for 6 years. She said that it was her wish, her final and unchanging wish, that the house and her savings go to me, and that the trust she had set up long ago, naming me as the primary beneficiary, was to remain exactly as it was. She looked into that camera with clear eyes and said that anyone who tried to change it after she was gone would be acting against her will. Then she squeezed my hand and asked me to make her some tea, and within 2 days the fog rolled back in, and 3 weeks after that, she was gone. I was holding her hand when she passed. It was a quiet morning, the light coming soft through the curtains, and I told her she could rest now, that I would be all right, even though I did not believe it. And it was in those final hours, while I knelt at her bed praying for the woman who had been my whole heart, that my family gathered in the hallway. I heard them. I heard my mother's low voice and my father's heavy footsteps, and I heard Brooke laughing, an ugly little laugh, and the rustle of papers, and a man's voice I did not recognize. I was too broken to understand what it meant. I thought in my innocence that they had finally come to say goodbye. I did not know that they had brought a lawyer to my grandmother's deathbed. I did not know that they were already dividing the body before the spirit had even left it. The funeral was held 5 days later at a small chapel near the river. It was a beautiful service. The chapel was full of Genevieve's old friends, her church group, her neighbors from 50 years on that street. I had arranged everything, of course. I chose the hymns she loved. I paid for the flowers. I wrote and delivered the eulogy through my tears. My mother and Brooke sat in the front row dressed in elegant black, dabbing at dry eyes, accepting condolences as though they were the chief mourners. People came up to my mother and told her how strong she was. No one knew. No one had any idea what the last 6 years had actually looked like, and I was too exhausted and too grief-stricken to tell them. After the burial, the family gathered back at Genevieve's house, my house now, I assumed, for the reading of the will. A lawyer I had never met before was already there, a thin man in an expensive suit, setting out papers on the dining room table where I had fed my grandmother's soup 10,000 times. My parents sat very straight. Brooke sat with her arms crossed and a strange, tight little smile on her face. I sat at the far end, numb, still in my black dress, my hands folded in my lap, expecting to hear my grandmother's final wishes honored. The lawyer cleared his throat and began to read, and the world I thought I knew came apart in slow motion. He read that the trust had been amended. He read a date that fell within the last 6 months of Genevieve's life, a period when she had been almost entirely lost to the disease, a period when she could not have told you what day it was or recognized her own reflection. He read that under this new and updated arrangement, the house, the savings, the entirety of the estate, all of it was to pass to Brooke, who had not spent a single night caring for her, to Brooke, who had appeared 4 times in 6 years, and I, Margaret, the granddaughter who had given up everything, was named in a single line that left me precisely nothing. I could not breathe. I remember the room tilting. I remember the lawyer's voice continuing as though he were reading a grocery list. And then I heard my mother's voice, sharp and rehearsed, cutting through my shock. She said, loudly enough for the whole room to hear, that I should be ashamed of myself. She said that everyone knew I had moved into that house and isolated Genevieve from the family. She said that I had spent those years whispering in a confused old woman's ear, turning her against her own daughter, manipulating a sick mind to enrich myself. She said that this updated will was Genevieve coming to her senses at the end, finally seeing through me, finally giving the estate to the granddaughter who truly deserved it. She looked at me with cold and theatrical disappointment, and she said, "You took advantage of a dying woman, Margaret, and now everyone can see it." My father nodded along with his arms crossed, the same way I imagine some other man somewhere nodded along while his own daughter was destroyed, and he said that family does not reward greed. And Brooke, my sister, looked at me across the table where our grandmother used to sit, and she smiled, and she said that she hoped I would be out of the house by the end of the month because she and her husband were planning to sell it. She said it the way you would mention the weather, and in that single, frozen moment, I understood everything. The laughter in the hallway, the lawyer at the deathbed, the papers, the whole thing had been planned. While I knelt praying for the woman I loved most in this world, my own family had been forging a new will, using my name, my access, my position as the one trusted person in the room to steal the inheritance that my grandmother had spent her clear final breath trying to protect. Something inside me went very still. The grief was still there, an ocean of it, but it stopped flowing, and in its place came something cold and clear and absolutely calm. For 6 years I had absorbed every insult, every dismissal, every theft, and I had called it loyalty. I had believed that if I just gave enough, suffered enough, stayed quiet enough, they would one day see my worth. I had believed that being kind to people who were cruel to me was the same thing as being good. Sitting at that table, hearing my sister discuss selling my grandmother's house while my grandmother was barely cold in the ground, I finally understood the truth. Being kind to people who are devouring you is not goodness. It is a slow and quiet way of letting yourself die. The granddaughter who wanted their approval, the daughter who kept the peace, the woman who made herself small so others could feel large, she ended at that table. What stood up from that chair was someone else entirely. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not give them the scene they were clearly expecting, the breakdown they had staged this whole performance to produce. I stood up slowly, I smoothed my black dress, and I said only one thing. I said that I understood and that they would be hearing from me soon. The lawyer looked uneasy. My mother looked smug. Brooke looked triumphant. None of them understood what I meant, and that suited me perfectly. I gathered my coat and I walked out of that house and I drove to Teresa's home, the friend who had warned me, and I sat in her kitchen, and for the first time in 6 years, I let myself feel the full weight of how badly I had been wronged. And then I wiped my face and I asked her for the name of a lawyer, a real one, the best one she knew. The attorney Teresa sent me to was a sharp and quiet woman named Diane Okonkwo, who had spent 20 years handling exactly these kinds of cases, the ugly ones, the ones where families turn on each other over the bodies of the people they were supposed to love. I sat across from Diane, and I laid everything on her desk. I laid out the 6 years of receipts, organized by month, totaling more than $120,000. I laid out my detailed nursing journal, dated and signed. I laid out the bank statements. I laid out the proof that I had held the medical power of attorney, that I had been the legally recognized decision maker, that the doctors and the hospice had every record of me and only me providing care. And then I told Diane there was one more thing, and I took out my phone and I played her the video. I watched Diane's face change as she listened to my grandmother, lucid and calm and certain, state her name and the date and her unchanging final wish. I watched the lawyer who had seen everything sit up straighter. When the video ended, Diane was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked me the date on the amended trust, the new will that left everything to Brooke. I told her. She pulled out a calendar, and she compared that date to my grandmother's medical records, the records showing the stage of her dementia at that exact time, the records that proved Genevieve could not have understood, signed, or intended any such document. And then Diane Okonkwo smiled, a very small and very dangerous smile, and she said the words that began the end of my family's reign over my life. She said, "Margaret, this is not a sad story about an inheritance. This is undue influence and quite possibly forgery, and we are going to prove both." I want to explain what that means in plain language because this is the part that mattered. Under the law, a will or a trust is only valid if the person signing it actually understood what they were doing and signed it of their own free will. If someone exerts undue influence, meaning they manipulate or pressure a vulnerable person into changing their wishes, that document can be thrown out. And if someone fabricates a document or forges a signature, that is not just a civil matter, that is a crime. My family had made one enormous mistake. They had assumed that because they were the loud ones, the confident ones, the ones who controlled the family story, the truth would simply bend to them, as it always had. They had no idea that the quiet granddaughter in the corner had spent 6 years building, without even meaning to, the most airtight case imaginable. Diane moved quickly and carefully. She filed to contest the amended trust and to freeze the estate, which meant Brooke could not sell the house, could not touch the savings, could not do anything at all while the matter was before the court. You can imagine how that landed. Within days, the phone calls started. My mother left voicemail after voicemail, her tone swinging wildly between fury and false tenderness. In one, she screamed that I was tearing the family apart. In the next, she wept and said that Genevieve would be ashamed of me. Brooke sent long messages accusing me of being bitter and unmarried and jealous of her happy life. My father sent exactly one message, cold and short, telling me to drop this nonsense before I embarrassed the family name. I did not answer a single one of them. I forwarded every message to Diane, who added them to the file because each one was evidence. The discovery process began, and this is where my family's whole house of lies began to collapse. Diane subpoenaed the records from the lawyer who had drafted the amended trust, the thin man in the expensive suit. It turned out he had been hired by Brooke, not by Genevieve. It turned out the signing had taken place in a hospital corridor, not in a lawyer's office, with no doctor present to confirm that Genevieve was of sound mind. It turned out there were no independent witnesses, only my parents and Brooke. And when a handwriting expert examined the signature on the amended document and compared it to my grandmother's true signature from years of clear-headed records, the expert concluded that it was almost certainly not written by Genevieve at all. The laughter I had heard in that hallway, the rustle of papers while I knelt at the deathbed, it had been the sound of a forgery in progress. The case never even reached a full trial. Once Diane laid out the video, the medical records, the timeline, the forensic handwriting analysis, and the mountain of evidence proving I had been the sole caregiver, the opposing side crumbled. The amended trust was declared invalid and thrown out entirely. The original trust, the one my grandmother had created with a clear mind years before, was fully restored, and under that original document, I was the primary beneficiary. The house was mine, the savings were mine, everything my grandmother had wanted for me, everything she had used her final lucid breath to protect, was restored to me exactly as she had intended. But the law was not finished, and neither was I. Forging a legal document and presenting it to a court is a serious crime. Because the evidence of forgery was so strong, the matter was referred for criminal investigation. Brooke, who had built her entire identity on being the perfect, loving, blameless granddaughter, the saint of the family photographs, was charged with forgery and attempted fraud. The woman who had not spent a single night caring for Genevieve now faced a criminal record that would follow her for the rest of her life. Her husband, a man who cared deeply about status and reputation, was horrified to find his family name attached to a fraud case in the local news. Their gated community life, their carefully curated image, all of it cracked apart under the weight of what she had done. As for my parents, the law could not easily prove that they had personally forged anything, though I have no doubt they orchestrated all of it, but the consequences found them anyway, in the way consequences always do. For 6 years, they had lived comfortably on the assumption that they would inherit through Brooke, that the estate would flow back to them, that I would be cut out and left with nothing. When the original trust was restored and I received everything, that future evaporated. The financial support they had quietly expected, the access to Genevieve's savings, the proceeds from selling her house, all of it was gone. My father, who was nearing 70 and had not worked in many years, suddenly found that the comfortable retirement he had counted on simply did not exist. They were left to face their old age on their own modest means, in a small home, with the high society friends who had once admired my mother's saintly online posts now whispering about the family that forged a dying woman's will. A few months after the case concluded, my mother came to find me. She did not call ahead. She simply appeared one afternoon at the door of the house, my house now. The house I had decided to keep and live in because it was full of my grandmother's spirit. She stood on the porch where I had once built a wheelchair ramp with my own two hands, and she wept and she begged. She said that we were still family. She said that Brooke had made a terrible mistake, but that she was still my sister. She said that I had won, that I had everything now, and that surely I had enough mercy left to help my own aging parents. She asked me to speak to the prosecutor and ask them to drop the charges against Brooke. I stood in the doorway and I looked at her for a long moment, and I felt, to my own surprise, almost nothing. No rage, no urge to scream, just a deep and settled calm. I told her the truth, quietly. I told her that for 6 years I had given everything I had, my career, my savings, my health, my youth, to care for the woman they all claimed to love, and that not one of them had ever offered me a hand or a word of thanks. I told her that while I knelt at Genevieve's deathbed, they had been in the hallway laughing and forging papers to rob me. I told her that I had spent my whole life believing that mercy meant letting people hurt me without consequence, and that I finally understood I had been wrong. Mercy without justice, I said, is just another word for surrender. And then I told her that the charges were not mine to drop, that the truth had a momentum of its own now, and that she should go home. I closed the door gently, and I did not open it again. I want to tell you that I struggled with that decision, and I did, for a few sleepless nights. There is a voice that the world plants inside women like me, a voice that says a good daughter forgives anything, that family is forever, that blood means you must bleed for them endlessly. But every time that voice rose up, I would walk through the rooms of my grandmother's house, and I would feel her there, steady and proud, and I would remember her clear eyes looking into that camera, refusing to let them erase what I had done. She did not raise me to be a martyr. She raised me to be her steady girl, with the heart of a healer and the spine of a soldier. Honoring her did not mean shielding the people who spat on her final wishes. Honoring her meant standing up. It has been a little over a year now since the case closed. The scar of all of it has faded, the way the deepest wounds eventually do, into something I can carry without bleeding. I still live in Genevieve's house, and I have slowly made it my own, filling it with light and music and the kind of peace it had not held in many years. I went back to nursing, not in the punishing overnight cardiac unit this time, but in hospice care, sitting with families in the hardest hours, holding the hands of the dying, doing the one thing I have always known how to do, which is to make sure no one faces the end alone. Teresa and I are closer than ever, the family I chose rather than the one I was born into. And every so often, when the light comes soft through the curtains, the way it did on my grandmother's last morning, I sit in her old chair and I thank her, out loud, for protecting me one final time. My sister carries a criminal record now. My parents live in the quiet, narrowed world they tried to build for me. And I, the granddaughter they treated as an empty room to store their burdens in, am finally fully free. I do not feel triumphant about any of it. I feel something quieter and deeper than triumph. I feel like a woman who finally stopped apologizing for refusing to be robbed. Going through all of this taught me something I wish I had understood 20 years sooner, which is that setting a boundary is not cruelty, and demanding justice is not revenge. It is simply the moment you decide that your own life is worth defending. I gave 6 years and $120,000 and nearly all of my health to people who would have let me vanish without a second thought. I chose at last to stop vanishing. I chose myself, and I let the truth do the rest. But living through it has made me wonder how many of you are out there right now, giving and giving to families that only ever take, telling yourselves that your silence is the same thing as love. So I want to ask you honestly, by pursuing the case to the end, knowing it would leave my sister with a criminal record and my parents with nothing, do you think I was finally standing up for justice, or do you think I went too far? Tell me what you would have done in the comments below. And if my story gave you even a little bit of strength today, please subscribe and turn on the bell so you can join this community where we tell the stories that too many people are forced to live in silence. Thank you for being here with me. You remind me that I was never truly alone.